Big.
Kind of,
We're getting that.
the two down.
No, should just be one that is here.
We are now calling the meeting to order.
Oh, but actually, it would be two. Okay, I see.
Going to give everybody just a second to get back to their seats while we start the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So tonight, before we proceed with the budget meeting, which was what initially was slated, we have a little bit of exciting news that we are celebrating Gary Woodland in our community on July 2nd at 6:30, but that also happens to be a Tuesday, which happens to coincide with a council meeting. Several council members have reached out to us with regards to their interest in participating in the celebration. And with that being said, we have in front of us, in your paperwork that was provided by staff to you earlier, a proposed agenda calendar document. It's got green lines on it, so if the council members could just take a look at that. So the proposal that we have for everybody tonight is, city manager and I discussed having the meeting at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 2nd, which would allow us to have 1 hour and 20 minutes of business to conduct. The items that we are talking about are in the first block. At 6:20, wherever we're at with the discussion item, we think that the discussion item will take just a little bit. We know that at whatever point that we stop at 6:20 will be moved on for further discussion. Now, the proposal, because we have so many things that we're having to work on, is to add a meeting either July 9th or July 16th. My request for the city manager was, because I thought that July 9th was not going to be one of those days that we were going to be here. I think July 9th is a regular meeting. I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be at EEI, which is for my other job. But the question that we had for everybody in the group was that, as you see, there's discussion items that are being proposed to be moved to that meeting, as well as the following action items. So the group could decide tonight whether they wanted to move the meeting, the items that are remaining from the first meeting to the 9th of July or to the 16th.
Just to clarify what we canceled the 16th meeting last Tuesday night, so you're proposing to add it back.
Well, we could either add
Or make a really long meeting on the 9th.
Really long meeting on the 9th.
Okay.
And still have the 16th off, or move some of those items to the 16th and have a shorter abbreviated meeting. So either is fine by both of us. Deputy Mayor.
I think the reason we did that, a lot of people weren't going to be here the 16th.
There were 2 council members that had expressed that they were out of town on the 16th.
So I would say the 9th.
Okay. Is that a motion? Do we have a second? So we have a motion and a second. So it seems like what we're doing is that the items that are remaining from the July 2nd meeting will be passed on to the July 9th meeting that Deputy Mayor will be running. Additional discussions or questions?
In that motion, also including that we have a start time of 5 p.m. on the 2nd.
Correct. Yes, thank you very much. With an end time of 6:20.
Right. Right. And then we would start at the regular time on the 9th and just go late?
Yes.
Unless you all feel that we need to start at 5 because we have added items. That is also open.
Just checking.
On the 9th, yes. Okay, so let me restate the motion because we've been having discussion. Deputy Mayor, there is a friendly amendment to your motion that we were to start as well on the 9th at 5 o'clock.
Yes.
That way we have additional time to get through all the items on the agenda. And you agree to the
I'll still
second?
second that,
Okay, so the motion, so that everybody that's watching at home, is that we are going to move The July 2nd meeting, we will start at 5 o'clock and we will end at 6:20. And then the items that are remaining from that meeting will be moved to the meeting of July 9th. That meeting will also start at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting. Could we do a roll call?
Sure. Councilmembers, let's go with Mayor Melissa.
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Blair.
Yes.
Ortiz.
No.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Reluctantly, yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
and Lesser.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. 8 having voting yes, the motion passes. That being said, and now we move on to item number 2, which is the discussion of the budget. Nick, take it away.
Well, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Tonight is our second public budget work session for the 2020 proposed budget. Tonight, as we mentioned last week, we'll be talking about our infrastructure departments, public works and utilities, and then we'll pick up where we left off last week, talking about other funds in the 2020 proposed budget. Like last week, we'll be tracking questions that are asked, and we'll provide a summary of those and go over those probably at our at the discussion on Tuesday night related to the proposed budget. And if possible, and the feeling is there, we'll discuss 2020 budget amendments next Tuesday. If not, we have the flexibility at our meeting on the 9th to also discuss budget amendments. And similar to previous years, we would just ask if there's anything that you're considering, any programs that you're considering budget amendments for, just send those to the city manager and finance staff so that we can look at those and determine what the impact of those amendments would be. But for now, we're still walking through the proposed budget and trying to make sure that you have all the information you need to be comfortable with any potential changes.
Deputy Mayor.
So we don't get the answers to our questions until the 2nd, the same night we have amendments?
So for the questions last week, we are finalizing those right now, and we'll send them out as soon as they're ready. For the ones tonight, we'll do the same and try and get those out as soon as
before the
possible, but just want to make sure that we're providing the most comprehensive answers.
That's fine, but it'll be
to you.
before the night we have to,
Yes.
yep, okay, thank you.
Additional questions for Nick? Seeing none?
Okay, so our first department is Public Works, and they are under the Investing in Infrastructure category. The department starts on page 128 of your budget book. This is, in terms of the number of funds, our most diverse department with 6 different operating funds, including the general, citywide half-cent sales tax, motor fuel fund, fleet fund, facilities fund, and parking fund. They also have some operating expenditures in the county-wide half-cent sales tax, and we'll talk about that in our other funds discussion. So from a personnel perspective, as we talked about last week in our general fund discussion, this reduces 1 surveyor's assistant position in the general fund. And then also, as part of our budget balancing measures for the general fund, transfers 90% of 2 project management positions from the general fund to the citywide half-cent sales tax. As part of the discussion on the citywide half-cent sales tax fund last year, when putting together the ballot language, there was a request to move snow removal expenses out of the citywide half-cent sales tax fund, and the 2020 budget reflects that with funding in the general fund for snow removal, in addition to the labor and equipment costs that come out of the motor fuel fund. For the pavement management program, the 2020 CIP and operating budget keep the program on track with an average annual funding of $24.4 million. One thing to note here is maintaining general obligation bond funding an average of $3.6 to $4 million annually is critical to maintaining our pavement management program and getting to that goal of a 60 pavement condition index score by 2027. Under the motor fuel fund, and I'll try and highlight the pages here too. Got that one, this last one. I'm jumping around just a little bit with this one, but on the motor fuel fund, which is page 145, our overall revenue trend for the motor fuel fund is flat and likely to not significantly increase due to fuel efficiency gains in vehicles. Just kind of an interesting note on this, projected revenue for 2020 is about $5.57 million. That's less than the 5.9 that we collected in 1997. So we saw a little bit of an increase in 2018, but overall that revenue source is trailed off, and that's again mainly due to efficiency gains in vehicles. So a certain percentage of every gallon of gas you buy goes towards that fund, and we've seen a decline recently. On the flip side, costs continue to increase with labor rate changes and maintenance of aging of fleet. And then productivity is increasing with changes in training and work plans, but still keeping an eye on that overall revenue source and making sure that we're able to keep up with that. So, just a note, street equipment is old and in poor condition. Our replacement cycle, we would need approximately $1.6 million annually to maintain acceptable replacement cycle. The 2020 budget has about $300,000 in there for replacement. So a fund that for the last several years we've been watching. I will jump to the fleet fund, which is on page 139.
Nick.
Yes.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nick, before you move on, when we interchange the lights, upgrade all the street lights and install the LEDs, does that come from our pocket or does that come from Westar? Or does anybody know?
Jason is probably the best to answer that one. He's
I guess, is there a cost to us? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Councilmember Ortiz, so the traffic signals, the yellow, green, and red lights, that would be an expense that the city pays. And then the city also owns street lights that we've converted basically to LEDs. When Westar changes out, they've changed out their street lights. That's an expense that they pay to make that change, but we get a different tariff rate on the back end for the cost of those street lights.
So
we pay for our own, and Westar basically invests in the LED light technology for their street lights, and it changes the tariff rate that we pay for those street lights.
okay.
But we don't pay the upfront cost of Westar when they
Changing them out.
changing them out, but we do pay a different tariff rate once they've converted them.
So is that tariff rate cheaper or more expensive?
I don't remember the exact, it's a little bit cheaper, and they did complete, I believe, all the LED conversion in the city this last year on Westar streetlights.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller.
If I could follow up on that, I recall I have one of the lights on the alley in the back, and recall talking to them when the program was first starting, and they said, oh no, even if they changed out your light bulb, they needed all the rate revenue to pay for the crews to go around and change all of them. So they weren't going to change the rates. After a couple years, though, I called sort of like the way people shop around for telephone service or cable or whatever, and I said, okay, I've seen the new rate schedule. If I didn't have an alley light and wanted one now, it would be $4 a month cheaper than the one I have. Do I need to have you turn it off? And they came out and they adjusted my rate down, and so it might be worth it to look at what the pricing is on new installs and make sure we're getting the best possible rate after the transition.
Sure.
Okay. Additional questions? Seeing none, Thank you, Dr. Peak.
We'll stay, Jason.
So the last piece I'll highlight is fleet services on page 139. And as we talked about during the budget last year, we've implemented the pilot phase of a fleet replacement program. The current program allows users to pay amortized replacement cost into the fund on an annual basis in exchange for a more cost-effective replacement cycle. This model is proposed for the entire fleet at a cost of, or at a projected cost of about $4.5 million annually. Right now, I believe departments participating include manager's office, the fire department, public works, certain divisions, and I'm trying to think of what the other ones, IT.
Development services.
Yeah, IT and development services. So that is something that actively working towards increasing. Again, that's a voluntary program right now. So with that, those are the highlights for the Public Works Department. And I'll see if there are any questions on.
Councilwoman Hello.
Thank you. I realize that the question that I have may sort of bridge public works and utilities, and so know that. And you mentioned efficiency and productivity earlier, something that I think has really gotten better over the years, but the citizens would say, why are all those guys standing around? Or why are they sitting in the truck? Or why is the engine running on the truck? Could you just brief us on if there are some of the advancements that we've made in the last year about productivity, maybe saving fuel in terms of leaving the AC in the truck running, if that's been happening?
Sure. So, I'll reference one that we talk about frequently in pothole repair. We're currently approaching about a little over 30,000 potholes that we've repaired in the city this year. Compared to the same time last year, we were at about 17,000. Part of that, I'd say in large parts due to we have some new leadership in our street department with Jackie Vogel and Tony Trower. Recently, this past year, they've implemented basically a skills-based pay system was part of our agreement with the Teamsters Union with a formalized training program for the different services that we're going through. So really kind of standardizing our work product, the way people do, the way they work in teams. They've also changed some of the approach on how we've done repairs into not just being reactive to the see-click fix, but addressing other needs within the area when they respond. The other thing too on the productivity side, we talked a little bit about the equipment. We did buy 4 new patch units last year. Prior to that, we had 4 patch trucks, all over 10 years of age. The components that keep the hot mix asphalt warm in the summer that allows us to do more permanent repairs, those vehicles were constantly out of service. And so I think, basically replacing equipment, the training program and the leadership we've had at Streets has definitely increased our productivity there.
Are there still crews of 4 always, even when they're just throwing hot mix into patches?
We kind of have 4 supervisors. The crews can be split up depending on workload. I mean, the actual number, depending on the project, will vary, whether they're doing crack sealing, street sweeping, or patching. That varies based on work.
It's pretty random when I pass a crew. But
Yes.
Just checking. And what about the policy of, this one just sort of came to me by a third party, but the issue of leaving engines running in terms of saving fuel and so on.
So
Is there a policy on that?
We do have an idling policy internally. I don't have any details on our idling performance at this time, but basically we want to reduce idling to save on fuel efficiency. So.
Thanks. That's all for now.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, Jason.
You know, I do have one more.
Councilwoman Hiller, yes.
Well, we were talking about fleet, and you were talking about the fleet being old and in bad shape, but it seems like we have a lot of new, really nice-looking equipment as well. So where are we on the trajectory of everything being all run down and being able to get it into a rotation that you think is satisfactory?
I think we're going to continue to see aging and decrepit fleet until we have a sustainable funding source to improve our replacement cycles. You know, like I said, we're putting $300,000 out of the motor fuel fund towards capital replacement. Motor fuel fund handles most of your street work, your snow removal, your street sweeping. We have a limited number of vehicles that we put into that fleet replacement program last year, as did other departments. No one has fully committed all of their vehicles and equipment into that program. And that's just, you know, what I see is needed so that we're regularly replacing our fleet. We have met with Enterprise to talk about fleet leasing programs like some others do, and even under Enterprise and their fleet model, we had them do a pilot of, say, about 250 vehicles. We would need annually about $1.4 million in that leasing program to make that work. And so the fleet replacement has been a key item that we've talked about with you all since I've been here in 2016. We were able to, you know, and thank you for committing that savings back in 2017 to start that pilot program. But going down the road, we need about $4.5 million annually citywide for the fleet and equipment replacement program. And that's, you approve that in the CIP that you adopted for the 2020 CIP, but that funding, of course, is outside of the 3-year CIB, and, you know, that likely would need to be a cash-funded item within the CIP is how it was proposed. So I think that's a conversation we're going to continue to have with you. Just, you know, when we started looking at fleet back in the original Faster study, you know, our replacement cycle for vehicles was about 17 years. And we need to bring that down, you know, depending on vehicle type, to an average between 7 to 10 years on some of it. We have programs for police and, you know, our fire engine apparatus, but it's all that other fleet that's not in a regular replacement cycle program. It's really up to departments, based on budget they can carve out of their existing operating budgets, to make those replacement decisions.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation on that. I think people know I'm into seeing that sort of cycle. Did you have a comment? Because I haven't.
Right, I do. And what I would comment on is, I think we need to remember is that when you look at public works, it's not just our dump trucks that we use for snow plowing. You got to look at our motor graders, street sweepers, our forestry equipment, and some of those areas, our end loaders that we use for loading our salt and sand. So there's many different pieces of equipment that you don't necessarily see running down the road at each location, like you would, say, our plows. And so for us, it's some high dollar equipment that takes a lot to be able to buy a street sweeper and some of this specialized forestry equipment that we have. And so some of those expenses, as they come forward, you could have a piece of equipment that takes his entire $300,000 amount to buy 1 or 2 pieces of equipment. And so it's something that long-term will have to be addressed at some point.
Well, and I know we've talked about forestry before, and people have been pretty protective about having our staff that we have, but have we looked at contracting with services that are good arborists and that already have that equipment?
I know Jason
Yeah,
can...
just say we already do supplement our forestry with existing contracts. They assist with removals and trimming on certain items. We reduced a portion of that contracting budget this year to kind of balance the budget. We have about 60,000 trees within our rights-of-way and city-maintained facilities. So I think even if you went with a full contract model to adequately maintain and service all those trees, you would be needing to spend more than we're currently spending. And that's part of, the other piece to that is we've talked with you about the asset inventory. We kind of have the count and location. The next step in that forestry program is really to kind of get the condition of those 60,000 trees and defined by genus and species. So we do have a more comprehensive plan and program. Right now, we're still kind of in a reactive mode on forestry management.
Something that we started before you came, just everything had kind of fallen apart, was getting back into routines on the preventive maintenance, such as crack sealing and street sweeping and so on. How are we doing on that, do you think? From not having any routines at all to getting back into a rotation that you think is healthy?
Yeah, so I think on the pavement management side, we're starting to see, fruits of that labor. I mean, we have the preventative maintenance program kind of going on in the eastern portions of our city this year, and it'll be in the western portions next year. The CIP that you guys approved basically included funding for that preventative maintenance piece. And we're trying to replicate that same model across our different asset classes, whether it's our fleet, our forestry, our traffic signals. That same approach applies to all of those.
I really appreciate that. Are alleys doing okay in that also?
Alleys is another one that we're working on. We've got a little different take within we were doing kind of blocks of alleys. We're trying to look and see if we can address approaches, which tend to be the areas that we're getting most of the complaints. Trans Operations has actually been working with WPC and trying some of the lime waste byproduct as a binding agent in some of our aggregate alleys to help extend the life in those. And we continue to work across all categories.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Councilman Ortiz.
Thank you. Jason, let's go back to forestry a little bit. I mean, because I know we cut personnel drastically in forestry.
Mm-mm.
I thought when we, when the parks went to the county. So is that something with what we're asking to do that you need more manpower, or do you think that, or are you exploring that, or, because I know, or is it being contracted out? I know that there was some not city, but there was a crew of trees, and it wasn't West Star or anybody like that, but they came through my block, which a lot of it's overgrown, and they trimmed, but they didn't really trim. I mean, I thought they would have trimmed more, over the street as opposed to, and they really didn't. They trimmed up, but not, to me, not as high as I thought they could have.
Okay. Not sure on the specific location, but I'll try and get you an answer to that. What I'd say overall to the forestry department, part of it's understanding what does our tree program need to look like.
Right.
And that way, once we have a better definition of that and level of service, we can communicate to you what our needs are. So right now, we're in a reactive, we get service requests for tree trimming. The recent storms we had, of course, we had to bring in staff after hours to kind of clean and remove debris. And so, a lot of times they're in that reactive mode in managing the canopy, but we are starting to implement other pieces, renewal, plantings, those things, but really need to kind of get the condition of our trees to better define what level of service needs we have.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify one more thing that you said.
Yes,
You
Councilman.
said on your major preventive maintenance kind of sweep, you're starting on the east side this year and going to the west side next year?
That's correct. So
I want to make sure Councilwoman Ortiz heard that.
This governing body approved the excess countywide sales tax funds. You authorized us to use that specifically for preventative maintenance. So in the first year, we kind of started in central Topeka. This year, we're in east Topeka, basically east of the old 75 and outside of downtown. And next year, we'll be west of I-75 and west of downtown.
Thanks. It's good to know, good for us to know.
Okay. Nick?
If I might respond to
Oh.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Yes, Councilwoman Ortiz.
They might not get out of East Topeka because it's so overgrown, they might not get out of it. So we might have to use it again next year.
Well,
Thank you.
All right, Nick?
We'll move on to utilities, and that begins on page 148 in your budget book. And a couple things to highlight on here. Our one increase of approximately $325,000 in contractual services, primarily through internal service fees and primarily in our payment in lieu of taxes and administrative service fees. On the commodity side, there's a $238,000 increase, and this is looking at all three funds combined. $238,000 increase in commodities primarily related to increases in chemicals, repair parts, and materials and supplies for water main breaks. And then the majority of the increase in our combined utilities budget is related to debt service and transfers. So debt service has increased just under $2 million for ongoing investment in rehabilitation, replacement of infrastructure. Transfers have increased by $2.6 million, and this represents additional cash funding of the utilities capital improvement plan. And so those would be the major highlights for the utilities department.
will we find everything that you just said in the notes at the bottom of the pages? I have a hard time keeping up.
Yes, so I mean, each fund has changes to the budget, and specifically in utilities, it does call out contractual commodities and capital and debt. So are there any questions on the utilities? If not, we'll jump into the other funds, and I'm going to go just a little bit out of order and go with the jump to the health fund, which begins on page 192. And I believe Jackie Russell is going to come up and just share a few highlights, and we've got a handout for you.
I'll do the other half later. Keep one.
Good evening, everyone. In a follow-up to last week's meeting, I thought that it would be good for me to share some information about the clinic and just overall status of health expenses. So what you're looking at on the blue chart is just some overall information. What we really try to focus on is disease management. The clinic, that was the primary reason for it. And then we also do episodic care. But this chart at the top shows you the overall utilization, and it's broken down by health risk, low, moderate, high. Non-HRA are those individuals that are eligible for the health plan but do not participate in health risk assessments. We don't know what their health risk is. What this top portion tells us that is about 43% of the eligibles are in the moderate to high health risk. And then if we look down at the unique patients, those are those that actually utilize the clinic. And what you'll see there, if you look at the moderate and high categories, is In that quarter four for 2018, 60% of those moderate and high are utilizing the clinic. And then if we look all the way over to the right-hand column of there, you'll see that on the rolling 4 quarters average, that 66% of the utilization is by those with a moderate or high health risk. And so what that tells us is those that really are at the highest risk for serious health conditions are a majority of the users to the clinic, and that's a good news story. If we go down to the disease management, the second half of the page there, what we've broken down is the top 50% of the eligibles and what their health risk, their different biometrics are, and also the top 20%. So what we're seeing there is the first time they did an HRA, and then their most recent health risk assessment, and the percentage improvement that they've seen towards getting to what would be normal. So just to give you an example, if we look at total cholesterol, we really want that number to be below 200. In the top 50% on the first health risk assessment, that average was 218. On the most recent health risk assessment average of the top 50%, it was 211. So we've improved by 3%. The average is still higher than what would be considered a normal range, but it's moving better. If we continue with the total cholesterol and we look at the top 20%, that's the top 20% of our high-risk health changes, their first health risk assessment average was 242. Their most recent was 224. And so they've reduced by 8%. Again, still higher than what would be normal, but improving by 8%. And that follows on for all of those biometrics that you can see there. So I'll stop there and just see if you do have any questions about what I've explained so far on the disease management and the health risk. So if you flip then to your...
Jackie, could you pause?
I'm sorry.
Councilwoman Taylor has a question.
Thank you. So only 629 of our 1,936 employees are using the clinic. Is that what I'm seeing?
That is unique utilization, and that covers what that is looking at is on average in that fourth quarter. So we have of eligibles to use, those are those on the health plan. And so in that fourth quarter, 629 unique patients came to the clinic.
Okay.
So that's just about little over 1/3, little under 1/3.
Okay, so if I look at the rolling fourth quarters, that's just an average of each
Of
quarter?
each
That's not how
quarter.
many people
No,
total?
no.
Okay. And how many are on our insurance?
Our insurance is just over 1,100. And so it's kind of weird how they add the math and come up with eligibles, but it varies because we have new hires and people that come off of the plan each month, so it's kind of done on a rolling average.
And if I may, how much does it cost us to provide the clinic, including the time from your HR staff that supports that?
So it's built into the health budget, and Nick, I don't know if we have it broken down by that line item. Annually, it's about $653,000, I believe.
Just for the clinic?
Yes.
There is one half of one employee who is paid out of the health fund in HR, focuses on wellness primarily.
Yes.
And then there'd be additional for all the assessments and all the stuff that...
And that's included in that fee.
In that 0.5.
Well, the $653,000 or so, that includes the health risk assessment charges.
Okay. I was just
And
thinking
then
of
that
the
total
staff.
cost is part of the total health plan cost that is then divided by the number of, people on the plan, and then the cost share formula. So the city pays a portion, the employees pay the portion. The way it's built is the clinic is part of the health plan.
Right. But it's something that we chose to add, thinking that we could help people be healthier.
Yes, and that's what and I'll kind of further show that picture
Okay.
and how that seems to be playing out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. If we look at the second slide, this is a slide from the Willis Towers Watson, our benefits consulting group. And this is looking at what our medical expenses and our prescription expenses per employee have done. And it looks at it in 3 periods of time. So our medical trend in the last 36 months is what you'll see on the red line, and that shows a negative 6.3% decline in our expenses. If you look at yes, I'm sorry, it's the purple line, I said red. If you look at the blue line, that is the most recent 24 months, and that will show a reduction in trend of 2.5%. And then if we look at the most recent 18 months, you'll see that trend is negative 10.4%. So our overall medical and prescription expenses are trending downward. The average medical trend is 6 to 8% increase per year. So over this time frame that they've shown here, we are trending downward when average is trending upward. And so that's one piece that we feel correlates to better management of our moderate and high-risk employees. Then if we go ahead and look at the last page, this page is from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and this is looking at the medical expenses and the percent of the overall claims expense. And it breaks it down. The blue line is inpatient care. The red line is outpatient services. And then the kind of lighter blue to gray line is professional services, and those are your specialty providers. And what we're seeing, and the clinic came online in 2016. So what we're seeing is a significant decrease in our inpatient hospitalization expenses. We are seeing an uptick in our outpatient and specialty care, but that's really a good news story because that means people are learning about things earlier and they're going to get treatment before it turns into something catastrophic that ends up in a hospitalization. So that's what we received from Blue Cross Blue Shield just last week. And I did receive a success story just last week that I'd like to share with you. Shelby and I were meeting with some other HR professionals, and we were just sharing with how our wellness incentive works. And one of the ladies wanted to let us know that she felt like the clinic saved her brother's life. One of the things that our practitioner, Lauren, does is on Tuesdays, the clinic is closed, and she goes out on a monthly schedule to all of the various locations, and she was doing one of the black bag blood pressure checks and told her, this employee, that he really needed to be seen right away, and she coordinated an appointment for him. And that led to a specialty appointment the following week with a cardiologist. And they most certainly felt that if he didn't have that appointment, he probably would have ended up in the ER within just a day or a few days. And so he's now under the care that he needs from a specialist. And it was just a complete stranger that just told us that story and was so appreciative that we came to him because he had an appointment in a few weeks and he knew he had something going on and was going to get it seen soon. So I wanted to share that with you all. And we hear stories about that from time to time. And I think that it's just a tribute that we are helping, remove the barriers to care and getting people to take care of things earlier, which is saving everyone money and hopefully improving the overall quality of life for our employees.
Councilman Emerson, to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Russell, thanks for this. This is great news. I did have a question just on this chart that you're just telling us about. It says Topeka, City of Topeka allowed charges by LOB.
Line of business.
Line of business, okay. And what do the percentages mean on the left side?
The percentages are the percentage of the type of service that add up to the whole cost of the expense. So it's broken down of inpatient, outpatient, and professional or specialty.
So so that's the portion of, in each case, they're 100%? But that's,
Well, all
is
three
that-
together would total 100%.
Okay.
So whereas if we look closer to 2014, the inpatient care was upwards of about 32, 33%. Now it's closer to 15% is what that would indicate of the total expenses of the medical.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Lesser?
Do we have a average average employee age for comparison of like 2016 to 2019?
I don't have it with me by age. Certainly, I could get that for you. Right now, our average employee age is about 41, the last time we looked at that, which we are getting a little younger. I know that about probably 5 years ago, that was 44.
And do you also track the age? I guess, let me rephrase that. I would be more curious to know what the average age of that pool of individuals on health insurance in 2019 versus the age in 2016. If I'm clear, does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. Certainly, that's something we can get for you. And you want 2019 and 2016?
Yeah, I just wanted to, so I can compare those to the graphs.
Jackie, those percentages that are decreased, what does that equate in dollars?
That's a hard thing to give an absolute correlation to, but I think that what we are seeing is that our expenses are coming in much below the medical trend, which is kind of medical inflation. So the cost of services continue to go up, and we've been actually decreasing and holding the line. And actually, when Nick gets into the health fund budget, our claims expenses and overall admin fees are kind of flat for 2020. And that would be going into the second year where we're staying relatively flat. Through our healthcare cost share agreement over the last 3 years, we have also enhanced our plan design. Each of the 3 years, 17, 18, and 19, we reduced the deductibles by 10%. And so we've had cost containment and enhancements at the same time, which is really unheard of, as what Willis has told us when they've come in and helped us with our planning for 2020.
Wonderful. Deputy Mayor?
The professional services, is that like a cardiologist and okay.
Yes.
So, okay. And to go back to the 653,000, and you said that's shared by all employees?
It's part of the total anticipated expenses annually for healthcare.
So do you know what that equates to, like each person?
Our plan on average is running just over $9,000 per employee per month, and that varies because employee only versus employee family. And then the average for our area is 12 to 13,000. I'm sorry, I said per month, 9,000 per employee per year.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. I normally work in months, but the total cost is by year. So,
Right?
and the average is about 12 to 13,000 per employee per year. So we are about 3,000 less than our area average according to Willis.
That's what the employee pays for
The
this?
total cost of the
What
plan,
is
it does not take into consideration the employer portion and the employee portion.
It doesn't?
That is just the total cost of a plan.
Of the clinic?
No, of all health care, because
I'm
it's.
talking about the clinic. How much does it cost to run the clinic?
If we break that down to a per employee per year, I don't know that we have that level of detail with us this evening. It's between per year, I'd have to follow up with you on that. I don't want to give you a wrong number.
2,000.
I mean, yeah, it's about $43 to $50 per employee per month.
And how many employees are utilizing this?
Well, and this is
Total?
this is a rolling total, so this is going to vary. And what I brought were quarterly averages, so about 600 per quarter.
So 50, okay, 600 per quarter out of, you said, how many total?
We have
19?
There was 1,900 eligibles in that rolling. And remember, that's a fluid number because we have new hires and then we have terminations that come and go.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Padilla?
Just a quick question, it kind of follows up on what you asked earlier, Mayor, thank you. With all the participation in the programs, can you determine if there's been a reduction in the use of sick leave by the city employees on the whole?
We have not made that measurement. There is some averages that the health stat does put out, that it saves time away from work and increased productivity. But I don't rely heavily on that because it's not based on actual data from our time and attendance system. It's just kind of on averages based on health risk.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller?
Quick math and a question. I think if we have 600 plus employees that are using the clinic and it's costing us $653,000 a year plus, and if maybe 700, let's say, then it's about $1,000 a person, right?
And that's on a quarterly basis. So there's more using the clinic, but on average, that's the number of people that visit in a quarter.
I was just trying to do some rough math. for
Yeah,
how
so
much
it's
per
just not
person.
as static as that may seem, because some people, if they, maybe they just go once a year or they're relatively healthy, others might go once or twice a month, someone might go a couple times a quarter, so it's just a really fluid number. That's why we deal mostly with averages.
My question was, because I was here before we started this plan, and when we were desperately trying to put money back into the health fund at all and dealing with having to raise those premiums and the other participation costs of the employees. As I recall, even though we were hoping that costs would go down, the first year this really kicked in, our expenses skyrocketed. And I think that would be 2016 that's in this chart, right?
It's probably into the 2016, 2017, and I think that the other thing that we see is that we have had higher expenses with outpatient and specialty, and they told us that we would expect some increases as people were finding out about things and getting care that they really need. And so it does look like, though, with 18 and so far into early 19, our expenses are dropping pretty quickly.
It does. I just for comparison purposes, though, how would where we are now compared to where we, compare to where we were in 14 and 15? Is it roughly the same? Because we really did have a spike. And for those reasons, I mean, we were all surprised, and then we kind of explained through it that all these people were getting assessments and going to do something about it, and they hadn't before, and that it should settle back out.
I think that it is settling out, and I think that what I would have expected us to see if we didn't take the aggressive step on trying to manage health risk would be that our expenses would be at least at trend, so increasing that 6 to 8% annually versus reducing.
I just wanted others to know, I mean, we're coming down off a spike.
Yeah.
Maybe, still.
Well, and we have to always expect that there's going to be peaks and valleys with health care when we're self-funding. So we're going to have the good years where we're running lower than expected, like we're taking advantage of now. But, you know, we, even with all of that we're doing, we will have high years where we do have high claims expense for our group too. It's just kind of the nature of self-funding.
Thanks.
All right, Nick?
I guess the only other thing I would add on the health fund is we did budget a slight increase of 4% over the current rate. That's actually a net budget reduction. Our 2018 rate, our 2019 rate came in under what we budgeted, and we budgeted for 2020 to go a little bit above that. And most of that is due to potential increase in the employer cost share of the health plan, but takes into account any potential spikes that we might see and helps us run through that. So that is all I would mention on the health fund. I do want to go back to utilities because I left out one key point on there, and that is just to remind you that the department is currently involved in a rate study to review and ensure that ongoing financial stability and affordability. So as you know, 2020 is the last year of approved rate increases. Those are 5% rate increases for the water, wastewater, and storm utility. The department right now is in an active rate study to look at beyond 2020 what is needed. So with that, I will we'll get back to where we left off last week, and I'm going to start on page 163. This is getting into our other fund discussion. And again, I'll just hit some key highlights for each of these. Have about 20 different funds to walk through, and I'll just go through a couple highlights on each. So on page 163 is the Downtown Business Improvement Fund. And the only no significant changes to the overall operating budget for the Downtown Business Improvement District, but does reflect, as you recall, Vince Fry came to the governing body, I believe in December or early 2019, and they looked at changing the tier system that they charge downtown businesses. So they reduced that from 3 tiers to 2 tiers, and I believe just combined the first 2 tiers. So that is reflected on the revenue side for the Downtown Business Improvement District. Next on page 164 is the Topeka Tourism Business Improvement District. That was added in 2018. That's a $1 per night per room tax on hotels in the city. That will go to the Topeka Lodging Association to provide a funding for the design and administration of the downtown Topeka Plaza. Right now, just anticipating no significant changes in the budget to T-bid, but obviously, you know, with new hotels coming on board, we'll monitor that and see if we need to change that projection.
Councilwoman Hiller.
And we skipped TPAC, and they often, and maybe that's what you ended on last time?
Yes, so we
Okay.
ended last week on those general fund, non-departmental functions, so I can go back.
Just wanted to make sure everybody knew that it becomes controversial sometimes,
Yep.
but I think you mentioned maybe last time, that of these big numbers that are on this page 162, really only 150,000 of it is cash, the rest of it is on paper in kind for the use of the facilities.
Right, those are, yeah, essentially it's utility expenses and building
Wanted to make
expenses.
sure that was clear.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nick, is camping considered lodging? Where does that fall in at?
I don't believe that is under in terms of the T-bid, I don't believe that's under there, but we can
You can get back to me.
double check on that.
I was just curious. We had a lot of campers.
Yes, Nick, you may proceed.
All right.
Take your hat.
So page 165 is the Court Technology Fund, and mentioned that briefly in the discussion on municipal court last week. That does include a transfer of $52,000 for the full court software license that had been paid out of the general fund. That was one of the department reductions in terms of balancing the budget. Okay, page 166 is the special alcohol fund. Again, that is 1/3 of the city's distributable portion of the special tax on sales of alcoholic beverages. These are used for services or programs for prevention, education, and treatment of alcohol or drug abuse. And again, that's we get the number from the county each year, and we allocate 1/3 to the general fund, 1/3 to a transfer for parks and recreation activities, and 1/3 to the special alcohol fund. Next on page 167, again, this is going back to a discussion on municipal court last week, the Alcohol and Drug Assessment and Referral Fund. So these are fees collected by municipal court on diversions of criminal proceedings to provide drug and alcohol evaluations, and appropriate referrals to include an internal alcohol information school by certified counselors. These fees provide money for a certified staff member to teach alcohol and manage cases, and that's the bulk of the operating budget. So no significant changes there. Page 168 is the law enforcement fund. So this is funds from various sources to be used for law enforcement purposes, including drug and tax forfeitures, crime prevention, and training. This budget stays relatively flat from a budgetary standpoint each year, and there are special restrictions on the fund, so no significant changes projected for 2020 in the law enforcement fund.
Deputy Mayor.
So when is, no, Mom, got it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to jump over the special liability fund because we talked about that last week with the legal department. And then we'll go to the transient guest tax fund on page 170. This does reflect approved funding from the governing body at the June 11th City Council meeting, and obviously reflects what the TGT committee passed in May. Next on page 171 is the countywide half-cent sales tax. What I will just highlight here is that this reflects the projects that are approved in the 2020 CIP. So this includes public works, some bike projects, as well as zoo projects. And those were pre-approved projects that were part of the vote in, I believe, 2016 to extend that half-cent sales tax. Page 172 is the Retirement Reserve Fund. This is funding for payouts for accrued sick leave, vacation, and other related costs of city employees upon retirement. No significant changes to the fund in 2020. Again, a portion of employee salaries goes into this fund to pay for those payouts upon retirement. Next is the Kansas Police and Fire Equalization Fund. This provides funding for a 15% penalty on retirees' final paycheck if that final paycheck is greater than the 3-year average for salary. So this is per statute. I think the cutoff for employees who pay this was in 1994. Jackie might correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But this is statutorily required.
Chief is shaking his head saying yes.
Good. All right. So this, again, was for employees hired before a certain date. Each year, we just budget the fund balance so that as those expenses come in, we're able to pay from this fund. After that funding goes away, probably we would have to pay that from a different funding source. But right now, we're okay.
Councilman Lesser.
Are we done with that item? Okay. I did want to jump back real quick to the special liability fund.
Yep.
And my question may be for Brent and Lisa, from when this budget was first done, Supreme Court's ruled no cap on damages. While we still have
Yes.
that used to be 350,000. Even though we do still have protection from the Torts Claims Act, has there been any talk or any discussion on what effect that could possibly have in regards to future losses and claims?
Jackie works with our insurance part, so I think it'd be best for her to answer it.
Sure.
So we have the general liability coverage now that we started in 2018. So anytime that claims get to half of our retention, which is typically $250,000, we have to notify the insurance company, and then they start working with our legal. So there is insurance coverage above and over what the tort claims would cover. So we have the special liability, we have the tort claims cap, and then we have the general liability insurance. So we've added a layer of protection starting in 2018 for liability coverage.
And what's the stopgap number on that?
It's a $500,000 for the general claims, and then there's smaller ones that break down, and I didn't bring that with me tonight.
Sure.
But so generally, it's a $500,000 retention, which is the cap on the Kansas tort claims. Smaller types of things, like we have a crime policy that's built into that has a $25,000 deductible. So there's different tiers of liability coverage, but the general umbrella is a $500,000.
And I'm not as concerned about the effect of it getting to that point because we have those protections. I guess I'm more concerned it's going to lead to more, the trial lawyers are going to have more ammunition because that limit's been removed. We're used to, they would have that, at least we had that protection of, from a settlement standpoint of the max we have at 350, so okay, we're going to try to settle at blah. Well, now that that's removed, we're all the way up there, and so that's where my concern is have we taken any consideration to that in building this fund of what that possibly will do to, settlements are going to go up is going to be the result of it. I mean, because there's more to risk now without the cap.
And that, I really don't have any part on the funding piece.
I think, based on that, I think we need to go back and take a look at our evaluation of that fund based on that information. I wasn't aware of that, possibly, I don't know if Lisa is aware of that or not, but we'll go back and take a
Is
look and
Lisa-
evaluate.
Yeah, she's.
So,
And legal's involved in the calculation of this fund and in the proposed 2020 budget, so they were, our partners in determining what essential to have.
Right, but this ruling just came down. It would have came down after the budget was done.
Oh, that's,
Yep, it happened like 2 weeks ago.
Councilmember Lesser, when we go through with the budget folks, we take a look at every case individually, so it's on a case-by-case basis, and we evaluate how much we think the recovery might be in that particular case. We haven't done anything specifically in relation to the Supreme Court ruling you're talking about, but I think we have a pretty good gauge on where things stand as far as where we think it's going to fall out, what each case is worth, and then we plug that number in when we come up with what might we need to cover.
Is the law retroactive to suits that had already been filed against us, or?
I would doubt that
No.
very, very much. I can't say it 100%, but I would say it 99%.
I could tell you that it's not. I happen to know a personal injury attorney, and it's not
It's not
retroactive.
retroactively, so it would have to be a claim that was filed from that day forward?
I don't
Whenever
even
the
think
law
it's
went
that
to-
day forward. I think there's a date that it starts coming in, but I think that now it's active, so.
Thanks.
While we're starting.
Yes, Councilwoman Heller.
I might have missed it, but what's the in and out of the, under the countywide half-cent sales tax of the $895,000 in 2020?
I'll provide some follow-up on that one. I'm not recalling it off the
It looks like
top
it's
of my
extra
head.
revenue and it's under other in the expense, so,
it's miscellaneous
Okay.
revenue.
I'll look into that,
Thank you.
and that'll be one of our
thank you.
follow-ups.
Yes, of course. Nick?
Page 174 is the Neighborhood Revitalization Fund, and again, talked a little bit about that last week, so just a couple highlights. Reflects new guidelines as part of the council adopted NRP plan in 2018. The funds go towards infill housing projects by the city or their housing partners, Cornerstone, Habitat for Humanity. As part of the guidelines, the housing must be in an NRP area. And Department of Neighborhood Relations and Planning and Development further developed funding guidelines for the projects, including the NRP funds can fund up to 30% of the total project cost. They must be in SORT neighborhoods, meet any design guidelines in the neighborhood plans. And right now, 2 projects have received these funds to date. And that would be Tennessee Town, 2 duplexes or 4 housing units from Cornerstone, Quinton Heights Steel, which is 4 single-family homeowner units by Habitat, and then there's been a request of $235,000 for 8 units. So that are the highlights for the.
I think that I heard about 2 of the projects, but when I heard about them, and I think they're great, so I don't have a problem with them, but I recall asking, even just last year, about these funds where the staff was asking the council to authorize the expenditure of money in the fund, even though there was no project either in the capital plan or otherwise, or guidelines that the council knew about, and was assured that no money would ever be spent out of any of the funds without it coming to the council. So I was a little surprised was kind of waiting still. I thought, well, maybe it would come to council, but to have $130,000 obligated without ever coming to council, it's just a precaution. We were assured that's not how it would happen.
Go back and
Nick?
look into that.
Maybe that's a city manager
I'll-
comment or question rather
Well, I
than for you, but.
I mean, we can go back and look at what was promised in relation to that and determine whether or not there's an oversight in that respect. But I can't answer that right now.
Appreciate it. It would be good to check, and also if there is something in particular that somebody does have in mind for 2020. you could
Yeah.
tell me.
Okay, next on page 175 is the Historic Asset Fund. So the highlight on here is a reallocation of roughly $24,000 since 2017 to use a match for grants from the State Historic Preservation Office for the following historic surveys, and that would be Tennessee Town, Collins Park, Auburndale, Garling Houses, Mid-Century Modern Buildings, Historic Window Restoration Workshop, and at the conclusion should have roughly $5,400 left to allocate to this program. Again, these funds, we don't collect revenue on them anymore. The $24,000 that was used for the studies came from a grant that was not able to be fulfilled, so it was returned to the fund, and they were utilized to pay for those studies. So I will now jump to CIDs on page 178. And what I will mention here is this reflects the addition of the Wanamaker Hills CID that was recently passed by the governing body, but does not yet include the Sherwood Crossing CID. But what you see on this page is just a summary of the different CIDs that we have currently in the city. Page 179 is the Tax Increment Finance Fund. Again, this reflects the addition of the Sherwood Crossing TIF District at 29th and Wanamaker. And then also includes the College Hill and Wheatfield TIFs, which have been previously authorized. Page 180 is the Debt Services Fund. What I'll highlight here is this does reflect planned debt payments for 2020 and also reflects the shift of just a little over 1/3 of a mil to the general fund. Again, that was part of the budget balancing measures for 2020. And next is Topeka Metro Transit Authority Fund on page 181, and I do have a correction for this page. So this is showing what should show for a TMTA in 2020 as a reflection of the 4.2 mils that gets transferred to TMTA that is levied on behalf of the city. And for 2020, that estimate is about $5.3 million. That is passed on directly to TMTA. Again, the city collects that and passes whatever is received onto the metro. So we can work to make sure that that's included. It will be included in online in the proposed budget. Make sure that it's updated there. So with that, I will jump again just further to page 190, and that begins the discussion on the risk funds. So on page 190 is the insurance fund for property and vehicle. Again, no significant changes. As Jackie just mentioned, we added the general excess liability coverage in 2018. That is also reflected in the 2020 budget. And funding for this is from departments based on prior year claims. And then page 191 is the Workers' Compensation Fund. Again, no change here. Funding for workers' comp comes from a percentage depending on the type of employee, and we have not seen a change in that percentage, at least since I've been here. So depending on the type of employee and the risk of that employee, they're charged a certain percentage. Okay. We had discussion on the health fund, so I will jump to the risk management reserve fund. Again, no significant changes in the risk management reserve fund. Any income that comes in through here is interest earned on the fund balance. So. And then finally, the unemployment fund. Again, no significant changes. This is allocated from city departments at a rate of 0.1% on employee wages, and that's actually been, I believe this is either the second or third year that we've had it at that level. We've dropped it down from 0.25% down to 0.1%. So with that, that is an overview of the other funds. Again, heard a lot of questions. We've been tracking those, and we'll go back and relook at the video and try and capture everything and get those out to departments for responses, and we'll try and work with you to get those responded to as quickly as possible.
Any other questions from the body with regards to any of the funds? Yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
You skipped the parking fund. And I think we've still been waiting for an actual parking plan, but there's discussion, as I understand it, of rates and meters and so on. So I don't know if you would have answers today, but is there a plan and a proposal for how parking would be structured?
So the parking fund, we sent out a memo to the governing body, I believe it was last week, with an update where we are on the plan activities. We're currently this week kind of in negotiations with the vendor on a lot of the financial components that'll help us be able to come back to you and tell you, hey, this is the cost of what we've heard on parking, and we anticipate doing that later this year.
Okay. I mean, it looked like, I remember when we passed it and actually got staff to help refresh on the minutes, we were at one point expecting a proposal in October of last year. And so it looked like what you had in that report, and I have not had time to get back with you, so forgive me if I'm wrong, was sort of stretching out those things that we authorized that first year to go ahead and work on. So just because these rates and all sorts of things could change.
I guess just a quick summary. So, I mean, the budget we're proposing in 2020 keeps us in line with those activities that you guys approved back in 2017 once we completed the downtown parking study. So budget gives us the ability to do that if you approve it. We still know there will be that discussion about gap of what's needed to keep the parking fund, and we really want to have detail of what those costs are, so as we talk to the governing body as well as parking customers in downtown, we're not just using the estimates that were in that original study. We have the cost from the vendor. We can be incremental in how we implement those. So, our anticipation is we get this contract finalized, we will be changing out meters in certain locations later this year to go to what's called a smart meter that will give the ability to pay with coins, card. It will also allow us to have a pay-by-phone parking app that we could probably use at coin opera, the old meters, through some type of QR code or something for people to log in. So we're going to be able to implement some of those things so that people can see what parking could be, but then to kind of continue that process throughout the entire parking system and maintain it will require additional funding in the parking fund.
Okay, I appreciate that update. I mean, I represent downtown, but also downtown's really important to all of us, and I know that some upgrades were made to the garages, but those still didn't include, for financial reasons, I guess, the digital readouts that apparently can be added to the system that staff purchased. But, and it always scares me to go that incrementally into those big expenses, but if you feel like you're steadily working toward it and be ready this fall. Uh-oh. That'd be good.
Yeah, yes.
All right, thank you.
Additional questions from the body? Okay,
He just did the best he could.
seeing no other questions, as Mike Badilla cleans up the mayor's mess. I guess this meeting, if there's no other questions or
I
comments.
do have
Yes,
one question.
Councilmember
So if we
Floyd.
do have other questions that we didn't cover today, will you just report them to the city manager and?
Absolutely, I think
They'll
city
get back
manager,
with
and then he will pass it on to the staff.
Okay, very good, thank you.
So just to you or to Nick?
Yeah, you can send them to me, would be the best, and, I mean, you can copy Nick, that's where, and Jessica, that's where it's going to go eventually, but, send it to us three, or send it to me, whichever is your pleasure. That way we can move it through the process that's necessary in order to get it reviewed. The other thing that I will say is, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have amendments that you're considering to the budget, we would like to receive some type of information related to that so that we can study that, provide you a better answer on impact of that change, especially if you're looking to expend more money than we currently have proposed. That has an impact, obviously, for us as to how we cover that and how that would be covered and what we would recommend for a change. So in that regard, please provide information earlier, the better.
And I personally, if I can add to that, hope, I said something when the budget first came out, we've got a substantially lower rate of raises for management than our line staff right now, and I hope that we can jointly look together to equalize that out somewhere, somehow.
Okay. Seems like there's no other questions. That being said, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.